All right, let's talk about the client IP settings. We've already showed some of these, but we'll talk about them in a little bit more depth here. And you can modify the IP settings for any of your network connections. And by the way, I got here from the network and sharing portion of Windows 7, but you can get there from the control panel. You can get here from a lot of different locations, as long as you get there. But you can modify the IP settings for any of these. And you can also modify the names of these if you wish. If you're on Windows 7 or older versions of Windows, the name would be local area connection with spaces. And it's never really good to have spaces in the name of your network connection. So I just changed mine to LAN. And you'll find on Windows 8 and higher, it's just called Ethernet. So one-word names are going to be much better, especially if you're going to work with that network connection in the command line, which we will later on. So let's go to that guy's properties and then bring up the IP version 4 properties and zoom in on that. And you can see here in the previous sublesson, we set up a static IP address. Remember the difference between the dynamic and the static. Now, these are the components of our IP connection. The first is the IP address. This is the IP version 4 address. It's a 32-bit number. 8 bits, 8 bits, 8 bits, and 8 bits. 32 bits in total. And this address is 192.168.0.220, but it could be any number, really. Generally, if you're working on a computer on a LAN, it'll be on a private network like this one. This is a Class C private network. But, you have lots and lots of options here as far as the IP address goes. Now, this IP address tells the network who the computer is. It is 220. It's on the 192.168.0 network, and its individual host IP is 220. So that's the IP address. It's the address of the computer. The next one here is the subnet mask. The subnet mask defines which portion of the IP address is the network portion and which portion is the host portion. So the 255s tell us the network portion. In binary, this is all ones. So the ones in binary tell us the network portion. And the 0 tells us the host portion. So we know from the 255s that the network number is 192.168.0. And we know from the 0 that the host portion is 220. So that's our subnet mask. You might have a subnet mask that says 255.0.0.0. And that would mean that the network was 192. Generally, you wouldn't see that, though. If you see 255.0.0.0, that is usually going to mean a Class A address, and it might be something like 10.0.0.1. And so the network is 10, and this is the host portion. The last 3 octets are the host portion. The default gateway is the device that and I'm going to change this back just real quick. So now we're back to our Class C network with our 220 address and our 255 subnet mask. The default gateway is the device that you connect to get past your network if you want to go to another network, such as the internet. Most of the time, the gateway IP address is on the same IP network as your own computer. So if your computer's IP address is 192.168.1.101, for example, then your gateway address will be on that same network number, that same 192.168.1 network number. And for example, you might have a Soho 4-port router that uses 192.168.1.1. It acts as the gateway for your computer and other computers out to the internet. Your local IP address, 192.168.0.220 in this case, it's got to be on the same network as the default gateway. That's that 192.168.0 network. Otherwise, it won't be able to communicate. And this is a common problem. If you see that the addresses are different and the person at the computer is having trouble connecting to the internet or connecting to other computers, it could be that the incorrect IP address was assigned. Maybe they put 192.168.2.220. Well, that's not going to work because it's not the same network number as the default gateway. Okay, moving on down to the DNS server. The preferred DNS server is the first DNS server that your computer will look to resolve domain names to IP address. if you go to a domain like google.com or davidlprouse.com or what have you, the name is great. That's great for us to know as humans. We can remember that name. But computers don't communicate that way. They communicate by IP address and ultimately by binary numbers. So the DNS server, the domain name system server, takes care of that translation, that resolution from domain name or host name to IP address. And you need to have a DNS server on your network. If you have a Soho router, it's most likely going to be the same address as the default gateway. It is the same device. It's doing both. If you don't have one and your computer connects directly to the internet, the DNS server will be on a different network altogether, and it'll be your ISP's DNS server. So, for example, 65.14.82.1, who knows? And then you might have an alternate DNS server. You might have a secondary DNS server like 65.14.82.2. That way, if the preferred fails, you can still do your name resolutions and get to websites. But more commonly on the LAN side, you'll be obtaining the IP address automatically and obtaining the DNS server address automatically. And that's going to be for your standard clients. It's only when you're working with servers or power workstations or critical systems or routers or printers that you'll use static addresses. Otherwise, the clients are going to obtain all this information automatically. But you want to know the difference between the IP address, the subnet mask, the default gateway, and the preferred DNS server. Now, if we obtain an IP address automatically and obtain DNS automatically, and go to our command line and do an ipconfig/all, we can view the information. We can't view it in that grayed out box. If it's obtaining automatically, we can't really see the info, but you can see it in the command line with the ipconfig/all command. And so we see here we're using the IP address 192.168.0.100, the subnet mask 255.255.255.0, the default gateway 192.168.0.1, and the DHCP server 192.168.0.1. So we have all that information there, and also the DNS server, same address. All that information that we would have seen in a statically configured IP on the property sheet in the GUI, we can see that when it's getting the information dynamically within the ipconfig/all. You could also use the netsh command if you wanted to, the network shell, to find this information. But the ipconfig/all command is a very easy one to use. So that's a little bit about the IP settings. Understand what the address is, what the subnet mask does, what the gateway is, and the DNS server as well. And that's it for this sublesson. And that wraps up this lesson on TCP/IP. We did a lot here. We talked about IP version 4. We also talked about IP version 6. You want to understand what the link local IP version 6 addresses are. So you want to know the IP version 4, the IP version 6 configurations. You want to know the difference between public and private IP addresses. You want to know the difference between static and dynamic addresses. You want to understand subnet masks. And you want to understand the client IP settings as shown here. Know the ipconfig command, and know that for the exam and know it for the field. You're going to use it all the time. And so that's it for this lesson.